the relationships with some of our animal friends are much closer than you'd like to admit as well. I mean, we've got a bigger brain, but other than that, everything else is remarkably similar to some of our animal friends. And even in our brains, the hindbrain bit, the bit that makes you jump, keeps your coordination right in scale, is the same for cats and rats and monkeys as it is for us. We've just got a bigger hard drive on the top. One of the really important takeaway issues from what we do, though, is that when we look at people, the computer's stopped, so that we can see structure and abnormalities in structure, but seeing what's wrong with function is sometimes really hard. So it's a bit like your computer stops, you take it into the shop, and you open the back of it, you can look at the structure, but it doesn't tell you anything about what the software was doing. And it's the same for people who've died, so that there's a whole group of conditions where the structure looks normal, but the function wasn't. And we're sort of a bit blinded to that because we can't identify that. And one of the ones gets talked about quite a lot at the moment is that there's a group of uncommon but terribly tragic deaths in young adults and kids where they've got a genetic wiring issue in their hearts, so they die suddenly and unexpectedly. Sometimes swimming, sometimes stand up to do something like that, and you look at it structurally, it's normal. So as well as looking at histology stuff, as well as doing toxicology testing, these days we're also doing genetic testing as well. The genes for that particular group of things, the group in Auckland who we work with, one of the leading groups in the world, but the turnaround time, unlike CSI, is about 3 or 4 months, and the cost is around, I think they've got it down to around $2,000 a throw. Right. So, really important stuff. And we can't do anything for the person that's died, but if you identify that, then we get the clinical geneticists and the cardiologists to look at the rest of the family, because most of the cases you can stop the rest of them from dying. And that's really the takeaway of what we do. It's not going to do anything for my patient, but it's what we learn from it will do for other people.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah. For the next of kin to understand what's happened, and that's often really important for take away things from it. So airbags, seat belts, side intrusion bars, all those things in cars have come from the study of what happens to people in road vehicle crash. And so the takeaway of patterns of injury and understanding all that has been things that have been changed in cars to keep people alive. So these days you can run your Volvo into a bridge abutment and get out, walk away. Whereas 40 years ago,
No.
But there are limits to what the human body will withstand. So that if you have a head-on with a logging truck, it doesn't matter what you're in. And despite what the police say, it's not speed doesn't kill; it's actually crashing that kills. It's slowing down too quickly that kills. Yeah. So those are the sort of takeaway things. Some of the things we learn too, people say, well, why do you want to do an autopsy on someone who's committed suicide? Not uncommonly there's something going on that the rest of the family were unaware of, either in terms of personal illness. So for example, somebody's actually got a brain tumour that nobody knew about. It's caused a personality change. They've gone out and killed themselves. And for the family to know that actually is a tremendously important part of the grieving process.
Absolutely.
Much more commonly the story about people having heart attacks and things, that's really important too, because one of the real basic principles of pathology is that if you draw a graph, so here's severity of disease coming up on the x-axis, here's the y-axis here with time. So disease is getting worse in a sort of straight line going up the page. But symptoms and signs, what people notice themselves, often is compensate, fail. So catastrophe theory is a big part of what we see. So often we'll see people who, but he hasn't had a sick day in his life, he hasn't been unwell. How can he have such bad heart disease? Well, that's the way it works. That, in fact, you've compensated, and finally you failed, and that's resulted in somebody dying. And that's such a common principle of what we see. And so, nice example, middle-aged bloke had walked out on his wife and moved in with a younger lady, and then had a heart attack. So his ex says, well, he was perfectly healthy when he was with me, what's she been doing? I think she's poisoned him. Well, no, actually he had terrible heart disease, and it's lucky he hadn't died 6 months earlier. So we see two groups of people. We see people who we sort of joke that it's not a wonder they've died, but how the heck have they lived so long, when you see their coronary arteries. And that's one of the puzzles of the most common form of heart disease, is that people's ability to compensate. And sometimes I don't know why they decompensated today.
No.
Can't answer that part of it. The answer is, well, why did they die today, not yesterday? I don't know. But sure as heck can see why they died today.
Yeah.
And the wonder is not that it happened today, but it didn't happen before that.
Yeah.
I remember working in Wellington a few months ago. There was a middle-aged guy, been out for a 90-kilometre bike ride in Wellington. That means a lot of hills if you're in Wellington. And you look at his coronary arteries and how was he getting up the hill? And, he got off his bike, got home and died. And think, well, not surprised. But how was he doing all that exercise without being symptomatic? And this is probably the biggest thing I spend time interpreting to families about, is that symptoms and disease are running different paths, and you then get this sort of collapse at the end that ambushes people.
That's why people drop dead at the end of a marathon. Is that?
Yeah, well, there's a classic recovery thing. So in the days when squash was the big thing for execs to play, people don't collapse on the squash court, they collapse sitting down in the change room afterwards. So you sit down and start to relax, and you get a run of abnormal cardiac activity and die. Yeah. So it's quite humbling for you as a person too, because well, I have this comment sometimes when I'm working on hearts. Ooh, I hope my coronary arteries don't look like this. Because as a 60-year-old riding up Kennedy's Bush Road, well, there's only one way I'm going to find out, isn't there?
Well, that's right.
And the sort of very, very dark joke in our department is I'm going to go to work for one last time. But
because I'm 70 and I'm still running, and sometimes
I
think, my God, should I be?
Go till you blow is the answer. Yeah. And it's not inevitable. So why not? Yeah.
Got to go somehow.
Well, yeah, and coming back to the issue about people who die and suddenly and unexpectedly, really hard on the rest of the family.
I know.
But it's real good for the person involved.
I know. That's what happened to my husband.
Way better than dying of dementia or nasty abdominal cancer.
Absolutely.
So but we don't often get given the choice.
No, this is so true. Wow, you've been amazing, isn't it?
So are you interested in